We are reaching the big event that we were waiting for in the classroom, and nobody managed to guess it right. I wonder if you've managed to guess it yet. Chapter 17. That Saturday, I packed my rucksack with 2 sleeping bags, a couple of torches, one of my mum's fruitcakes, and some crisps. I'd raided these all from the kitchen cupboard. I planned to meet Iona at the treehouse, go home for tea, and then slip out after dark. Planning on running away, said Mum. Did she know? I looked at her, but she was smiling. She was clearly only joking. You look like you're going away for a week, she said. I slipped round to the other side of the kitchen table. It's just stuff for the treehouse, I said. Aye, well, don't be too long, she said. There's rain coming. This hot weather's going to break soon. I'll be back for tea, I said. I walked out of the cool kitchen into the wall of thick summer heat. The air was still with it. The farm dogs, Kip and Elsie, lay panting in the shelter. They were in the shelter of their kennels. I turned on the hose, and they chomped on the sparkling stream of water as it splashed into their bowls. Sheep were pressed into the shade of the stone wall along the top fields. The grass was brown and dry, and small insects buzzed above the grass flowers. I was glad to reach the shade of the trees along the path by the loch. I'd been thinking about the surprise Iona said she'd have. She'd been busy getting it ready. What could it be? Was she already waiting for me, watching me? I looked up to the trap door into the treehouse. It was shut. Iona, I called. There was no answer. Where was she? I climbed the rope ladder and pushed open the trap door, half expecting to see her face grinning at me. Iona, it's me, I called again. I hauled my rucksack up into the treehouse and looked around. Iona wasn't there, but on the wooden wall opposite the window was Iona's surprise. It was a huge painting of an osprey catching a fish. It was painted onto the wood itself. It was so detailed, down to every feather. There were drips of spilled paint along the floor below. It must have taken her ages to do. I poured the cake and crisps from my rucksack and put them on the table and rolled the sleeping bags out across the floor. Iona, I lifted up the benches to see... I lifted up the bench door to see if she was hiding, but she wasn't anywhere. I leaned out of the window to look back along the footpath. There was no sign of her. The clouds had turned purple and grey, like a dark bruise spreading across the sky. To the south, thunder rumbled over the mountains. If Iona didn't get here soon, she'd be soaked. Maybe she'd forgotten, but it wasn't like her. I scrambled down the rope ladder and set off along the path, hoping to meet Iona on the way. I followed the track by the river to join the old mineral tracks going down to the village. In the crook of a dried-up puddle lay a long feather caked in dirt. I crouched down to pick it up and clean it on my sleeve. It was creamy white with thick stripes of dark brown. It was definitely an osprey feather. I tucked it in the combat pocket of my shorts. Large single drops of rain hit the ground by my feet, sending little puffs of dirt into the air. I glanced up at the sky. A great cloud was looming up over the ridge, its shadow dark against the hillside. The thunder sounded again, closer this time. I began to run. The sky was darkening, and as I reached the road into the village, even the streetlights lit up. I could see Iona's house on the edge of the village. It was a small, squat cottage, painted in whitewash that had turned grey over the years. An old crofter's cottage lay derelict beside it. Maybe I'd missed Iona on the way here. Maybe she was at the treehouse already. But I was sure I hadn't missed her. I knew she'd take this path. I just knew it. I jogged along the road to the house and slowed to a walk near the open gate. The front garden was a mass of weeds and tall grasses. An old bed frame lay in the corner, strangled in bindweed. its rusty springs and tattered cover decorated by the white trumpet-shaped flowers. A dim light came from within the house. I'd never been inside before. Rob and I used to dare each other to knock. We'd knock on the door and we'd run away. We'd hide in the bushes and watch mad old McNair shake his stick wildly in the air from his doorway. What if Iona wasn't there? I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. I walked up the path and stopped at the door. The pale blue paint was peeled and flaking. I knocked on the door and waited. It opened just a crack. I could see Iona's granddad, the white bristles on his face, a reddened eye, and the sleeve of his dressing gown. "What do you want?" His breath stank of whiskey. I wanted to run. Is Iona in?" He squinted at me through the door. "Callum McGregor, is it?" "It is McNair, Mr. McNair." He opened the door a bit wider. "Come in if you like. You cannot stay long. Iona's not well. Summer flu it is. Had it myself back along." I followed him into the front room. I had to squeeze past piles and piles of boxes and old newspapers. The room smelt damp and musty, like spoiled grain. Thin brown curtains were drawn across the window, and the television flickered silently in the corner. Iona was curled up in an armchair under some blankets. She looked cold despite the heat of the day. A mug of tea, with a scum of cold milk and a plate of uneaten toast, were on the floor beside her. Iona's granddad glared at me from under his thick eyebrows. "Don't be long." He picked up a half-empty bottle of whiskey and shuffled back past me. "I'm away to bed, Iona. Call me if you need me." I sat down on a pile of old newspapers next to her. "Hi, Iona," I said. "Are you okay?" "I woke up with flu this morning," she said. She wiped her nose across a scrunched-up tissue on the armchair. I passed her a box of clean tissues from the floor. "Thanks," she said. She lay back and pinched her fingers on her forehead. "It feels like my head's going to explode. I just couldn't make it to the treehouse. Sorry." "It doesn't matter," I said. "Another time." Iona screwed her eyes tight shut. I could tell she was trying not to cry. I know she must be feeling pretty rough, because I didn't think she'd miss out on sleeping in the treehouse for anything. "The painting's really good," I said, "of the osprey. Do you like it?" I nodded. I took the feather from my pocket. "I found this for you," I said. "Osprey feather," she murmured. "Where did you find it?" I started telling Iona, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Her eyes were closing and were drifting off into sleep. I sat there watching the silent people on the TV. Iona's breaths were short and shallow. I heard the creak of floorboards and the dull thump of Iona's granddad climbing into bed in the room above. I took the feather into the crook of her hand and got up to leave. "Bye, Iona," I said quietly. "Callum?" "Yes," I said. "Look after Iris. Keep her safe." "You can check on her yourself tomorrow," I said. "Promise me." Iona looked at me through tired eyes. "Yes, Iona," I said. "Of course, I promise." I pulled the blankets up around her and left her after that. Outside the weather broke. Rain hammered the hot cement. Sheet lightning flashed neon yellow. I walked home through the monsoon rain. I never saw Iona again. Chapter 18. I woke to rain pattering on my bedroom window. I glanced at my clock. It was 9 already. I'd slept late. I pulled on my clothes and peered out of the window. It had rained in the night, hard and heavy. Deep puddles pooled across the yard. Kip and Elsie were barking in their kennel. I looked at the clock again and thought it was strange because Dad usually let them out by now. I went down to the kitchen and Mum turned to me as I opened the door. Dad, Graham and Hamish were there too. Graham slammed his cup down and stormed out. Dad and Hamish wouldn't look at me. Were they cross? Did they know about the plan to sleep in the treehouse? "Sit down, Callum," said Mum. "What have I done?" Mum put her arms around me. "It's Iona," she said. Mum held me so tight. She died last night. I pushed Mum away. No, but I saw her last night. Dad came over to me. I'm sorry, son. It's not true, I yelled. She was okay. She's got summer flu, that's all, just flu. I looked at Hamish. He looked pale, deathly white. I've just come from a house, he said. The ambulance was there. I backed away from them to the door, shoved my boots on and started running. My lungs burned and my chest ached, but I didn't stop until I reached the treehouse. I pulled up on the rope ladder. My hands stung with cold and my feet slipped on the wet wooden rungs. I flung open the trapdoor above me and hauled myself in. Rain had seeped into every part of the treehouse. Water dripped from the sleeping bags and the cake on the table was soggy and turned to mush. The colours in Iona's osprey pelting had bled into the floor. All the tiny details were lost. It was a ghost osprey now. Everything was not going right today. I kicked a box of biscuits out through the trapdoor and watched it clatter against the tree roots. I wanted to scream and shout. I wanted to cry, but the tears just couldn't come. I flung open the shutters and the north wind slammed them against the wooden sides. I leaned out of the window. "Iona's dead!" I shouted. "Dead!" Iris turned to look in my direction. She was hunkered down on the sheltered side of her nesting tree. The mottled brown of her wings merged into the peeling bark of the branch. Her mate was in the eyrie. I couldn't see the fledgling chick, but knew it must be huddled in there somewhere trying to keep dry. I leaned right out of the window, so half of me was over the drop below. "She's dead!" I shouted. "Dead!" "But what do you know? You're only a stupid bird." Iris ruffled her feathers. Alive, bright eyes were watching me. Her alarm call rang out through the driving rain. "Kee! Kee! Kee!" I clapped my hands together and Iris launched into the air. "You're only a stupid dumb bird." I slammed the shutter against the wooden sides of the treehouse and the noise echoed across the loch. Iris wheeled away over the wooded hillside behind me, the underside of her pet body pale against the iron sky. I sat there staring out over the loch, just staring. Broken sunlight filtered through the clouds. Iris didn't return to the nest. Iona had said she would leave for her wintering grounds in Africa by the end of the week. Maybe she had already gone. I had promised Iona I'd look after Iris, and now I'd just scared her away. I was half asleep when a soft rush of feathers whistled over my head, followed by a dull thump. Iris landed on a branch beside the treehouse. I could hardly breathe. She was so close. I could see the vein of every feather and the metallic curve of every talon. She ruffled her feathers and scanned the southern horizon. "You're going, aren't you?" I said gently. She turned her head and fixed me with her brilliant yellow eyes. She looked right into me, and suddenly I knew, then, in that moment, I was as much part of her world as she was of mine. I couldn't help thinking that maybe, just maybe, deep in the bird's soul, she knew the promise that I had given to Iona. 15th of August, 1610 GMT. Nest site, Highland, Scotland. Iris flew up through the broken sunlight into the cold, clear air. She circled the nest one last time. Her mate was preening his feathers, oiling them after the heavy rains. She banked away from the eyrie they had built from sticks and grasses, and away from the insistent calls of the full-grown chick they had reared that summer. The pull south was too great now. The need to fly was strong. It pulsed inside, hard-wired deep into every nerve and muscle and cell. Each day the sun did not rise so high. Each day its arc across the sky lowered towards the pale blue curve of the southern horizon. Iris soared on the updraft of the cold north wind. It rippled under her feathers and carried her up through the drifting threads of cloud. This was her world, of vast skies and reflected waters. She knew high into the fast winds. She flew and flew, leaving behind the ancient landscape of mountain peaks, glittering lochs, and wide river valleys. Tune back in for chapter 19 onwards, when the direction of the story is set to change following the events of what we've just read.